going to talk a little bit about business value that mass timber brings to these projects, and no greater advocate for mass timber than those people who are putting their money where their mouth is in Swinerton. Thank you guys for the investment in your subsidiary company Timberlab and building a mass timber facility near Greenville, South Carolina, and Piedmont, South Carolina. Today we've got William Silva, who is currently leading pre-construction at Timberlab, but is transitioning into the national mass timber role for Swinerton, and Brooke Whitsell, who works with Timberlab, and excited to have them come up to talk about the precision and efficiency that Timberlab is advocating for through their projects, and in addition, some of the observations that they have about increasing value for development. So please join me in welcoming William and Brooke.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to Tim and Matt and Georgia Forestry Foundation for inviting us to come here and, do what we love to do, which is share our passion around mass timber and kind of what we've learned in the last decade working in mass timber. It's just really exciting to hear, and I love coming into rooms like this because there's a lot of people here that share that passion. I would say sometimes you hear new things when you come into a room like this, but it's because in the last decade, I kind of joke that in mass timber, that's like 3 lifetimes in mass timber. And so it continues to evolve, and what is a barrier today is something that next year is something we're likely able to do. And I think you'll hear some thoughts that we come here with about getting past cost and starting to look at how we bring value to buildings and work with clients to increase that value through mass timber. But before we start, I always like to start with people who are connected to wood. This is my favorite way to intro. You get to know a little bit more about me. And, I think about, Georgia Forestry is the #1 industry, $42 billion industry, as Tim shared last night. But I also think about the importance of mills and the impact on rural communities. Because for me, when I think about wood, I think about, coming from a family that is 4 generations in timber, and I think of my grandfather and his brother as young men in the 50s on a logging operation in Southern Oregon, where I'm from. And to me, that smell of wood that we smell in mass timber buildings, that sensory experience, is prosperity. And so that's kind of how I equate it in my mind. And so that's my connection to wood.
Yeah, hello everyone, Brooke Whitsell. My connection to wood, I grew up in rural Idaho, which I don't know when I say Idaho if you equate that with forests, but they are there, I promise. And just being in the backcountry on horses with my family, and that's my happiest memories. And then I also, the town I grew up in, Boise Cascade, had a very old mill there, and I really was able to see the ups and downs of feast and famine when it comes to that mill being operational. And so a healthy rural economy is definitely near and dear to my heart. So excited to talk about all things mass timber with y'all.
So recently we were involved in a market study. We looked at market capacity and market supply. It just published a few weeks ago, but really focused on market growth from over the last 5 years. And kind of broke it down by how wood is often looked at as far as the Northwest, the West, and the East. I will say that I usually don't count Texas in the East, but they do. But I think one of the things that's really key here that just pops off the page to me is that stat of the compound annual growth rate in the East is 49% for mass timber. And really, last year was 61%, but you look at the square footage of what is happening with that, and it's staggering. We really see that growth piece as part of it, and part of our approach over the last decade, and we'll talk a little bit about it, has been really looking at from forest all the way through to the frame. And so how do we scale and prepare ourselves for the kind of growth that we anticipate in the East?
And this is one of my favorite slides to continue to update, because it really has been proof in the pudding of the growth on the eastern portion of the U.S. 23 completed projects and 16 in progress, and definitely more to come for Swinerton and Timberlab on the East Coast or eastern portion of the U.S. And it's really exciting. I know Woodworks has lots of stats about this, but the amount of momentum and projects in pre-construction that we're seeing more and more in the eastern part of the U.S. it keeps increasing, and I really think that a lot of folks understand the benefits, and we're going to kind of dive into those a little bit deeper, but it's really cool to see that momentum and be able to deliver on some projects here in the eastern portion of the U.S.
So a little bit about our story. So Swinerton is a 137-year-old company, largely known as a general contractor and builder. But, almost a decade ago, we completed our first mass timber building. It was a 156,000 square foot mass timber office building, then the largest in the United States. But we saw so much benefit in it. We got really excited about what the opportunities were with mass timber. And so from that first tech project, which really focused on a people-first approach to their building, we started to see in orange several milestones internally for how we evolved that project through to the Ascent Tower that we worked on in Milwaukee, which is the tallest hybrid structure at 25 stories, all the way through to the Portland Airport, and kind of what that means. And now what we're seeing in airports is people starting to visit these projects. But it's been a continuous story of investment that is shown in the white text of looking at, large format beam saw was our first initial investment because there were only 3 in North America. And there were any beam deeper than 24 inches was being sent up to Canada to be cut and brought back down to be installed. And so we really looked at that investment piece, and then, seeing the growth coming in the East, opened up our Timberlab facility in Greenville, and really kind of continued from there as we vertically integrate into manufacturing and glue lam, and currently with our cross-laminated timber piece manufacturing facility will top out on November 18th, and we'll be pressing panels by the end of next year.
And just very quickly, a little bit about Timberlab. We're a vertically integrated mass timber subcontractor. As William just mentioned in that previous slide, we really started installing, and that's how we caught the bug, or our gateway project, however you want to call it, and really haven't looked back since then. We really enjoy mass timber and have learned an immense amount of lessons from every single project. And so really fast forward to today, where we can control a project from log to frame. We don't necessarily do it on every project, but we find that we like to just complement the project needs and add value where we can.
So with over 70 mass timber buildings complete, and the numbers are increasing, we do look early at strategy and what is the building construction type. You've heard a little bit about that earlier, but just showing that there's diversity in approach for the mass timber buildings that we've built. Also the building uses, we're involved in a number of market sectors, and I would highlight that half the pie chart is really civic buildings, higher education, and K-12. And I think those are amazing projects to execute on because, especially in early days, those are publicly available projects. So when you do a city hall or a community library or a higher education building or even a K-12 project, elementary schools, people are being exposed to wood. They're understanding what it is and how it changes the environment. 12 of our projects have been in education, and to me, it is phenomenal for how it changes. I remember I was talking to a nurse, and she was talking about doing the high school trip with her son to look at potential universities. Walked into a building we were involved in. She didn't know it, but she said, hey, it became the top priority for him to go to OSU Cascades in Bend because of the mass timber building and that experience of what it offered, both in program, but the learning environment that he would be exposed to. And I was like, it's like it makes the buttons pop off your shirt for having been involved in something that, just like popping out your chest. It was really exciting. I think the other thing that's interesting is not all buildings are tall buildings. Shorter structures are great opportunities. Doesn't have to be a high rise. High rise is an opportunity, But it's like even the structures that are civic, we see those at lower heights. I mentioned the markets we serve. We're a $6 billion contractor with 24 offices across the U.S., including here in Atlanta. But I think what we've been focusing on is bringing mass timber solutions into all of our projects. And you can see from the green halos the projects where we have delivered a mass timber building, and those that are in yellow, we've already got something in design or something that's similar that we can draw on to kind of bring a mass timber solution. And so it's really about how that expands into markets, and the greater the exposure we have, the more critical it is. I mentioned to Tim and Matt, I met with them a couple weeks ago, just talking about if we can get like 5 mass timber buildings in a city, it creates the opportunity to take people through the spaces and experience different outcomes. And it really starts to change the mindset that it is not, bleeding edge, leading edge, but it is more mainstream for a solution in a building.
I think what's really cool too is that if you rewind back to kind of the first original mass timber buildings in the U.S., it was really office was the market where it could thrive and really be a good solution in that market sector. And then to see today where mass timber is in virtually every single market type, it's cool to see that resiliency and the fact that it's a really great solution no matter the market, and it's just maybe about finding the barriers and overcoming them and being the first. And so we're really excited about some of those emerging markets and seeing mass timber penetrate them. And then, a little bit about, vertical integration, right? I think that one amazing opportunity we have is we have such a robust domestic supply chain. And other folks have, really hit on that today, but especially Georgia is really proud of its forests, and they are mighty good forests. And so utilizing that regional supply chain and creating this kind of risk-adverse solution by, we've got tariffs going on right now. If we can source a lot of that superstructure from in a 200-mile radius or even just the U.S., that's a huge value add to an owner, right? Who wouldn't want a risk-adverse solution for their budget and their schedule? So I think that vertical integration and the expansion of the U.S. supply chain when it comes to mass timber is only going to accelerate the growth and really provide a lot of opportunity to developers and owners alike.
Yeah, that image on the bottom is our cross-laminated timber facility, and it's much more daunting in real life because at 190,000 square feet, it's really the 880-foot long building that really boggles the mind, and the photo from the inside and how the clear story is going to bring natural light into that manufacturing facility really speaks to it. And what we found recently with industrial buildings is that they're actually, if you have conditioned space, are more cost effective. We actually considered the default solution of business as usual for our facility of a pre-engineered metal building, but we found that mass timber designed correctly was 8% cheaper than an industrial metal building. And so it doesn't mean that a shed structure in metal is not going to beat mass timber, but it's really finding that right application. And now we've, there's been really a shift in that industrial approach. Transparency and tracking. I loved the comments earlier about track and source from Troy, but this is a big component. It's like, how do we look at wood and offer that as a solution? And becoming vertically integrated has allowed us to look more closely at how we source wood and bring it into a project. And the goals for any given client can be different. And so these are several projects, probably of 7 projects we've done where we've looked at sourcing all the way back to the forests. And really, is the solution a regional wood solution? Is it about restoration forestry? Is it about small or tribal landowners for the forests? Is it about local proximity? A project we did for HP, or just turning over right now, 225,000 square foot facility, 100% of the wood fiber came from tribal land. Project for Boulder City, was about local sourcing and bringing local wood supply into their built product. And so it's starting to be about, like, how do we leverage our manufacturing capacity within the U.S. To continue to advance it until markets start to stand up on their own on the manufacturing side, and how we promote that, overall forest economy.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been really diving into that kind of track and trace mentality, especially we're working on Texas A&M's Appleton Center, and Texas is also very proud of its wood and its forest, and they really wanted to have a Texas first sourcing goal. And so we're really working hard to provide all Texas lumber for that project. And it's a massive, massive project. And so I think more and more as we create these partnerships with local mills and manufacturers alike, it'll be easier to be able to supply that regional wood if desired. I will say we take a very realistic approach to it, though. Oftentimes we get, asked, hey, I've got some trees on the land, can we use those? And we can build you a bench. We can build you a really nice bench out of those trees, but it's a bit more complex than just that. But really excited to see the future and as regional sourcing becomes more and more of a common theme in projects.
I think when it comes back to value, we started to talk about increasing value through mass timber, and it's really about having the right questions up front. A lot of times you hear, hey, it's a mass timber building, start assembling your team early. I think, some of the ones that come to the surface early are going to be, speed and schedule when we talk about mass timber. And it's like, does time have value is a big counter question to that. Because it has the ability to deliver faster. And a lot of times we say 20 to 25%, but that's usually our starting point for a mass timber structure. And we really are talking about it at concept. How do we look at how the building is framed? How does it deliver through? But there's a lot of benefits from cross-disciplinary communication in the project delivery. And we talk about partners in the approach with the owner, the architect, as the general contractor, and the trade partners for bringing that together. But the construction benefits are immense. You heard Matt earlier talk a little bit about dimensions and virtual design. We found one of the early benefits was we all of a sudden have a structural material that we can build to a 16th inch tolerance. Some people will talk millimeters. I grew up talking 16ths, but it is 100%. To me, it's exciting to have a digital twin, but it's not just that we have that for the frame. We start to have that for the building services, for the building envelope, and it's really bringing that certainty together to where an MEP subcontractor can rely on that dimensional certainty to prefabricate assemblies and kind of marry it up because the digital twin matches the built environment. Cost competitive, Scott mentioned it earlier, cost is always there. But I think starting at the beginning, really cost parity is achievable in mass timber. Our first project was 4% cheaper and 4 months faster than structural steel. But it was recognizing all of the benefits in the approach. And really, some of the other things that list down on those bullets really talk to, whether it's reduction in site supervision because of a faster schedule, but it can also be about the bearing values of the soil. It's like, on First Tech, our first project, we found that it's great farmland, but it doesn't really hold buildings really well. And so there's a lot of advantage to what that can be. And so it's really kind of uncovering those together as a project team.
And then, diving into some owner benefits, which this is not an all-inclusive list, right? But we've kind of talked about the why behind why an owner would want to come and utilize mass timber in their building. And oftentimes you'll get in this visioning session and owners just start speaking about what they want out of the building, and you instantly go to mass timber. You want mass timber, and they may have not have heard of that before, but it aligns quite nicely with their needs, and that's really how First Tech happened, the first project. Market differentiation, folks have already mentioned that today, right? But being able to get maybe higher lease values or rental rates, or even just the fact that you're having a people-first mentality and high retention. For some of the different, built-to-suit offices we've done across the country, I randomly will be presenting or an airport or, whatever, and people will come up and be like, my grandson works at that office and loves it, right? And it is, the proof is right there that people really do enjoy living and working in these biophilic spaces. It's incredible. I would say, as well as it's the kit of parts, right? IKEA, or whatever you want to call it. I like Lincoln Logs. I was a Lincoln Logs kid, so I kind of liken it to that. But it really is, you're getting this kit of parts shipped to site that's smaller crews, faster, safer, and higher quality. And what owner doesn't want that, right? So lots of owner benefits. There's lots more there as well. Sourcing, kind of already highlighted the domestic supply chain that's growing by the second, I swear. and that kind of cost certainty, and also just being able to feed into that regional economy, right? That's really, really important to put our people to work and keep forestry afloat. And so I think that's a really amazing opportunity that we have in the mass timber sector as it grows. And then, of course, the sustainability aspect, and that's really like what I'm very, very passionate about. Mass timber has a lot of great solutions, but we've got one planet, we need to take care of it while also supporting society. And so I think it's a renewable resource, right? And those working forests are healthy forests. The more we can have focus on maintaining them and creating healthy ecological systems, trying to reduce wildfires, all of those things, it's so, so important. And mass timber is a great way to highlight that and show the importance of maintaining and managing these forests. As well as the opportunity, right, that wood stores carbon or sequesters it, and these timber structures can have 40 to 60% less carbon than steel and concrete. So really, really cool opportunities on the sustainability front, and it's really, you can't go on long enough about all the reasons why it's so great. And I think we're seeing more and more, like I said, with momentum on the eastern part of the U.S. that people are getting it and building with it.
Yeah, I think the whole discussion of the carbon registry, it provides a North Star and a guiding light for other people to adopt that. And I feel like there's such a connection between a lot of our mass timber buildings have been net zero energy and net zero carbon. And so it really starts to reinforce a different outcome, because as we look at those benefits, you see alignment in those solutions. Press it harder. Holistic cost analysis. I think this is something that is almost taken for granted in how we look at mass timber, but this is really how we found that 4% benefit on the first project, is that there are premiums when you start looking at the building systems, but there are a lot of cost benefits. And so we really try to strive as a team to work in the orange, like how do we recognize the maximum number of benefits in how we build buildings.
Yeah, just really quickly. This was a very, very quick A1 through A4 analysis of baseline steel compared to some different species types in mass timber. Overall takeaway, right, is just converting from steel to mass timber, you're gonna reduce your embodied carbon by a decent bit, right? Over 50% in certain cases. But the second really large takeaway is highlighting that southern pine. And that is really where a lot of your opportunity to even have further savings in your embodied carbon is really critical here, especially on the East Coast. So I think it's cool. Mass timber is an amazing solution, and then harvesting in that regional supply chain is an even further opportunity to help with your CO2e.
So we're going to do like two really quick case studies. We're just going to hit highlights, and I could talk for First Tech, give you a dozen themes and points, but we're just going to hit a couple of them. Obviously, our first project in mass timber, it's where we bit the bug, or got bit by the bug, so to speak. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this slide seems painfully obvious, but I say it probably every day. And someone mentioned it earlier, right? If you have a building that was designed for steel or concrete, mass timber can do it, but should mass timber do that grid, right? And is there a way that you can get in early and help influence the grid design and understand the non-negotiables or the flexibility of the structure to set up mass timber for success and efficiency? So in First Tech, we really started with business as usual, 30 by 30 grid, assuming a steel building, and then decided, hey, let's look at mass timber, let's pursue mass timber. How can we do this differently, right? And so transitioning more into that 15 by 32 and being able to also eliminate that perimeter beam. It's just inherent cost savings there, but then also you get the added benefit of much more daylight coming into that building and really helping with that people first and bringing the outside in and creating that biophilic workspace. So really cool opportunities when you start with timber first and really try to set it up for all of its efficiencies and what timber does well. Schedule opportunities. We've all been saying the same themes, right? Mass timber is a smaller crew, it's faster. And I think First Tech was a really cool opportunity to kind of do a side-by-side, where we have on the left side of this slide, a 170,000 square foot, built-in-place structure, crew of 35 in 6 months, and then you compare that to, the mass timber structure on the right. a crew that's a fifth of the size and building it in half the time, like, that is incredible. We are in a skilled labor shortage. If you can get that kind of results using mass timber, who wouldn't want to leverage that speed to market and, you know, being able to have that quality, safety first mentality that comes with mass timber? And really one way we were able to see those schedule savings is we looked at the structure and sequenced it. Instead of saying, okay, it's, you know, it's a 30,000 square foot floor plate, 5 stories, it's, why don't we look at this in thirds and build a tower? And find that efficiency from like looking at it like it's a tower. And so you can really see on that top right picture, you can see the sequencing happening where on the left side of the picture you've got dried in some, and you're moving on to the center where you're lifting columns and setting deck and then moving on to the very right side for the last phase. And so I think that there's really creative ways to sequence buildings and really accelerate and recognize that benefit of speed of construction.
And I do want to highlight, and I keep echoing, I felt strong alignment with Troy. A lot of this is the reduction is the field crew. But we're transferring those jobs into high-wage jobs inside of a controlled environment. And so it's really addressing the solution in a different way. Heartwood is an exciting project, privately funded, not a LIHTC deal, but workforce housing. And it was the first Type 4C to go through the city of Seattle, so a lot to take it through a jurisdiction that is not an easy jurisdiction. But what an amazing outcome.
And you know, talking about some innovation, especially with the 2-hour fire rating. While we're in the middle of pre-con and design assist on this project, we were getting some feedback that steel prices were escalating, and so we kind of took a step back and thought, where can we remove steel from, right? And the wood-to-wood bearing connection was a really opportune place to look at how do we use the mass timber for what it's good at. So we looked at doing the first Morrison tendon connection that we have done on a 2-hour rated structure. So really, really cool. Did some mock-ups, kind of figured out constructability and tolerances, as well as some, how to hit that 2-hour fire rated connection. And was really an amazing connection. Our installers loved it and not having to mess with steel. And it really amounted to about $5 a square foot of cost savings at the end of the day by transitioning to this connection. So not insubstantial, and it's really fun to say, like, we did some Japanese joinery on a 8-story structure in Seattle.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to bring old woodworking techniques back in as solutions for projects. And then really for the workforce housing piece, just grid optimization and really looking at our encapsulation strategy and approach to the project really led us to roughly a 15-foot bay. And I think sometimes bay size is super critical in residential solutions to get to something efficient. But how does it work with the building systems and the building envelope? When we look at site logistics and speed of construction, especially on a tight urban site, and again, the comments about Pond City Market and not having trucks stuck on the road, this site, you first approach it and you go, man, this is a great site. I've got an alley, I've got 2 roads. This is a great urban site, until you realize it's a private alley you can't use. And then it's high voltage power lines on one side. And then there's a large heritage tree on the corner that you have to preserve. So the image on the lower right gives you the idea. It's a 40-foot window that you're erecting that structure through. And parking is tight because you're on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And so still through that, we were able to deliver the speed and put a floor of structure up every week, but also enclose as we went, so you see the dry-in happening below it, to where, because we panelized the exterior skin because of that dimensional certainty, we could put a floor of skin on in a half a day and really kind of get the dry sequence to allow for follow-on trades, and that led to speed. And so it's really about finding those complementary benefits in mass timber, thinking outside the box, not embracing business as usual is part of what gets us where we need to go. So just to kind of wrap out, I think a lot of times we hear biophilic design, and a lot of people go, what's biophilic? I think I know. But I'd like to think about it in a different way. And so part of what I like to do is really kind of take through how we think about questions and reflect on it. And so it's like, when does a building become a process that supports the person? I think about a friend of mine who's high up at Nike, and he talked 15 years ago about, we used to think Adidas and Under Armour were our competitors that were taking our resources. But the reality is we're competing for a workforce across the whole thing. So what do we offer that's uniquely different to attract top talent? And so it's like, what are the qualities of an enriched environment? So the Portland Airport, great example. It like creates a different environment. And, it's a common common thing to hear people talk about, like people walking 15 feet, setting their bag down and taking a picture and enjoying the smell of wood as a sensory experience. But this is an academic building, higher education building in Bend, Oregon for OSU Cascades. It's like, how do buildings make us feel? How does it change our perception? You know, what if the building you entered every day greeted you with an environment that nourished your mind? This is a project down in Orange County for Orange County Sanitation, and the entry lobby has an amazing diagrid over the top, and it really kind of greets you as you come through. And then it's like, how do we create an environment that enhances the person and the creative process? This is a shot from First Tech, where we talked about the elimination of that perimeter beam. And not only does that natural light flood the floor, but you feel, you know, it's a 13-foot floor to floor. And the reality is, with a raised access floor, you feel that soffit inside of the space. You don't feel the bottom of the beam as the height of the space. And I can't describe it to you, but I'm telling you, it is a very different environment to work in. And so, you know, little comment at the bottom in the orange box, being in mass timber building creates a sensory impact. Seeing, smelling, and touching the wood creates an experience that changes how buildings are perceived. I think those would be the words I would leave you with. We have a very short period of time. I see Matt coming with the shepherd's hook. I'll say that for Q&A, just seek us out. We're always happy to talk about it. But mass timber is an amazing opportunity.